In this video, I'm going to show you how to work wrap and turn short rows in garter stitch using my azalea top as the example. Short rows are rows that aren't fully worked. Instead of knitting all the way to the end of a row, you stop short and leave some stitches unworked. In order to avoid holes in your knitting, at that point where you stop short, you wrap a stitch and then turn the work. After all of your short rows have been worked, you then knit all of your stitches, but you make sure to knit the wrap with the stitch it's wrapped around, and this prevents big holes from forming. You'll often see short rows in top patterns where you want to create shoulder shaping. I'm working on the front of my azalea here, and the first short row instruction says to knit to the last 3 stitches and then wrap and turn. So I have just a couple more stitches until I'm 3 stitches before the end. Okay, I'm 3 stitches before the end. To do my wrap and turn, I keep the yarn in the back of the work, then I insert the right needle into the next stitch on the left needle as if to purl, so into the front of it just like this, and then I slip it over to the right needle without working it. Then I'm going to bring the yarn to the front of the work in between the 2 needle tips just like this. Then I'm going to take my left needle and insert it into that stitch that we had just slipped and slide it back to the left needle. And then I can return the working yarn back to the back of the work. Then I turn. Okay, so our first wrap and turn has been made. Now here's a tip when working wrap and turn short rows in garter stitch. Because this next row will also be knit, even though we're on the wrong side of the fabric because we're in garter stitch, the yarn needs to move to the back of the work so it's positioned to knit the next stitch. So in the previous wrap and turn, you could have just left the yarn in the front of the work before you turned, and that way it would have already been in the position in the back of the work for the next row. Okay, so the second row says to do the same thing as the first row. We're going to knit to the last 3 stitches. We're just about to the end, or 3 stitches from the end, I should say. Okay, so just like we did on the other side, to work our wrap and turn, I'm going to insert the right needle into the next stitch on the left needle as if to purl, so into the front, and then slide it onto the right needle. Then I'm going to take my working yarn, which is in the back, and bring it to the front, so it's in between the in the front in between the 2 needle tips. And then I'm going to take my left needle and insert it into that slip stitch that was on the right needle and slip it back to the left needle. And unlike the last time, I'm going to show you, I'm just going to keep the yarn in the front. I'm not going to return it to the back, and I'm just going to turn my work because I'm going to want that yarn in the back anyway. Okay, so we've done our second short row. So then the next instruction is one that you'll often find in wrap and turn short rows. And it's that it says to knit to a certain number of stitches before the previously wrapped stitch and then work your wrap and turn. So first thing I want to show you is how to know what the previously wrapped stitch looks like. So let's go back to the other end here. If you remember, we worked the last one 3 stitches before the end. But the previously wrapped stitch has a horizontal bar right underneath the stitch. So you can see it's right here is that wrap stitch. Another identifying factor is that there's always a bit of a gap right next to it as well. So going back to the other end, the pattern says to knit to a certain amount of stitches before the previously wrapped stitch. And for my size, it says to knit to 3 stitches before the previously wrapped. So I'm going to go ahead and knit to those 3 stitches before the last wrap stitch. Okay, so let's take a look and see how far away we are from 3 stitches before the last wrap stitch. Now again, here is our wrap stitch right here. Again, I can tell there's that horizontal bar underneath it, and I can also tell because it's the stitch right next to the gap. So 3 stitches before that would be 1, 2, and 3. So I have 3 more stitches to knit. Okay, so then we'll work another wrap and turn. So insert the right needle into the next stitch on the left needle purlwise. Then bring the yarn to the front of the work. And then slip that stitch from the right needle back to the left needle. And then we turn the work. Now here's a tip that you might find helpful. After you have turned the work like I just did, you can place a marker on your right needle, just like this. And then you can start knitting your next short row. So let me turn the work over and show you what this marker is doing. So by placing a marker here, this was our last short row right here. So by placing a marker here, the next time we do a short row on this side, instead of trying to struggle to figure out which was the wrap stitch, you could just know that you need to knit to the marker. This is just a little tip that I found helpful, especially when I was new to wrap and turn short rows. So if you're struggling to be able to tell the difference between a wrap stitch and an unwrapped stitch, this might be a really helpful tip to follow. Okay, so I'm going to turn the work back now. So now I'll just continue with my next row, which was the same as the previous row, knitting to 3 stitches before the last wrap stitch. So you'll just continue in this manner, following along with the pattern and working your wrap and turn short rows on each side. In the next part of this video, I'm going to show you how I later pick up and knit the wraps as I reach them. And this happens on the last row of the shoulder shaping. So I'm back now, having finished my short rows here. And right now I'm on the left front side. But what I'm about to show you will be the same when you're on the right front as well. So on row 24 of the left front, it says to knit to end, hiding wraps. So what that means is that I'm knitting this row, and when I encounter a wrap stitch, I'm going to knit the wrap as I reach it. So let me go ahead and start knitting to my first wrapped stitch. Okay, so I've made it to my first wrap stitch. I can tell because it has that horizontal bar underneath it, and I can also tell because there's that gap right next to it. So to hide the wrap, we're going to knit the wrap with its stitch. So first I'm going to take my right needle and I'm going to insert it into the wrap. So that's this right here. So from the bottom to the top. And then I'm going to insert my needle into the stitch itself. So it looks like I have 2 loops now on my right needle here, 1 and 2. And I'm just going to knit them together. So I'll make sure to pull that loop through both. Okay, all done. So you're going to do that at every single wrap. Okay, so here's my next one. I'm going to insert my right needle first into the wrap from bottom to top, and then insert my needle into the stitch itself, and then knit them together. Now, if you had used my tip and placed a marker at each wrap, there would have been a marker, say, right over here, and you would just remove the marker and then do the same technique. Okay, so I have completed my last row and I have knit all of my wraps as I reach them. And as you can see, you don't see any large holes or anything, and it really creates a nice shoulder slope. So that is how you work wrap and turn short rows in garter stitch using my azalea top as our example.